Well, thank you everybody for joining us today for our presentation on study abroad and the benefits of study abroad. I'd like to introduce Professor Greg Laurence, who has done several study abroad trips. So I'll let you introduce yourself and take it away.
Hi, everybody. My name is Greg Laurence, and welcome to this presentation. Before I start, I do want to say, yes, please feel free to jump in and ask questions as we're going through. I made slides because they give you something to look at other than me, but they may spark questions, and we can just treat this like it's a conversation about study abroad. And so I'm looking at the names of the folks who are here, and I have not had any of you guys yet in class. So if you don't know, or if you haven't heard, I teach the MBA class, Management 501 and Negotiation, and the 546 Advanced Negotiation class for the Org Leadership and MSLOD students. And then now and again, I'll teach the Management 541 Organizational Behavior class. I taught that this last fall. I don't know when I might teach it again, but we'll see. And then relatively frequently, as you'll see in a second, I also lead study abroad courses for our students. So I'm the chair of the Department of Management and Marketing. Also for U of M-Flint, I'm the director of the International and Global Studies program, which is the faculty group who I suppose run is a good way of putting it, but we sort of direct the faculty-led study abroad programs on campus, which are all of the short term 2-week, 3-week programs, which is most of what I'll talk about today. And then I have sort of a third role in the university, director of graduate studies for the Center for Japanese Studies in Ann Arbor, which is sort of related to this because I have generally lead study abroad to Japan. So I want to start, I guess, with maybe a little bit of background and history about me to sort of understand my interest in and I suppose passion for study abroad. I don't know how many of you guys have study abroad experience. Can you say yes if you have ever studied abroad? So that sounds like no. Okay, that's cool. Actually, that will mean you're probably going to be even more excited about the prospect of it when we're done. I actually did my first study abroad experience in 1988 when I was a junior in high school, and I went to Turkey as an exchange student. I actually wanted to go to Japan, and I went with AFS, the American Field Service, and unbeknownst to me, right, the way that they worked their placements was there was a lot of demand in Turkey to host American foreign exchange students. So any American student had it was like if the word Turkey appeared on your application, that's where you were going. You might have said like Turkey is my favorite food, and they'd be like, oh, Turkey, yep, you're going to Turkey. So I've had Japan as my first choice, Greece as my second choice, and Turkey as my third choice, and that's where I went. To be fairly honest, at 16 years old or whatever it was, 17, I guess, I was not ready to do a study abroad, really. I didn't figure that out until I got there, but you live through the experience and you grow and you mature and get better. But it was a fairly difficult experience for me at that age. But it kind of lit the spark, right? Like it gave me the sense that as I got older and started thinking more about what I wanted to do in life, I felt a lot more comfortable with the whole notion of being and living over abroad. And that led me to, after college, decide to go and work in Japan. And I taught English as a second language, thinking when I went in 95 that I would be there for a year, and a year as rapidly as 1 year can turn into 6, 1 year turned into 6 years. And I worked in a couple of different contexts in an English conversation school, and then for a private junior and senior high school. But towards the end of that experience, I got to feeling like I didn't really want to teach English as a second language for the rest of my life. Like, it just felt like it was time for something different. So I actually came back to the US and did my MBA. Then I did an MBA and a master's in international relations at Syracuse University, with essentially the singular goal of going back to Japan and doing anything that was not teaching English. So I went back in 2003. And we'll come to this sort of at the end of the presentation, but my entree back into Japan was a graduate level study abroad program. So, you know, we'll mostly be talking about these short-term programs that we run, but the last slide that I have does show you the options that UM-Flint and SOM have available if you're considering a longer study abroad. I did the last semester of my master's degrees at Waseda University in Tokyo, and that got me a visa so that it made it relatively easy to find a job in Tokyo, as I was there for a long time and didn't have to, there's not going to be any pressure on me to leave right away. So stayed then for 3 more years working for a development consulting firm and for the American Chamber of Commerce in Japan. After which point I decided that, like, I'd rather think about people working than actually work myself. And so decided to get a PhD so I could do research about people who work. And here I am. Now, since joining UM-Flint, I have kept a fairly robust international profile going. I've been a visiting scholar at Nagoya University in Japan twice, in 2012 and 2017, and led or co-led 4, I guess it is, study abroads up to this point, with a 5th virtual study abroad scheduled for this summer, and then and another actual study abroad, hopefully if the pandemic situation calms down, scheduled for 2022. So I try to keep a robust sort of international profile going. I've been to conferences here and there. I taught at our partner school in Romania for a couple of weeks a couple of years ago. That was a pretty interesting experience. And so, you know, that one international experience back in 1988, right, has sort of colored my approach to life and my sort of view of the importance of studying abroad ever since then. So so that's me and who I am in terms of this topic. And my initial plan, right, was to talk you through what one of our study abroad programs is like, and sort of going from beginning to end through the 2018 course that I co-led with Shelby Newport, who is an associate professor of theater and dance. Now she's associate provost and dean of undergraduate students at UM-Flint. And this was a class that really came out of a lot of conversations that she and I had about you know, different aspects of her work and my work, and how they sort of crossed each other in interesting ways. And we put together this class called The Business of the Arts in Japan, went over in 2018 with 19 students, 1 SOM alum, one non-student member of the community, and then the 2 of us as faculty members. So it's a fairly big group, as you can see from the picture there. And we were in Japan for, I think, 12 days, traveling around different places, and we'll sort of walk through how that whole course went. We had an aim, right, of showing students like how business and art interact with each other. And in some ways that are kind of obvious, right? Like, you know, museums are businesses, orchestras are businesses, the music industry is a business, right? Like there are some fairly obvious examples like that. But we were also trying to expose business students to notions of art and aesthetic and design that might help. The idea was to have people think about their business program in a different way, right? And not sort of in the debits and credits and product, place, price kind of things that you learn as core ideas in an MBA program, but more along the lines of like, well, how are you seeing businesses and people interact in this different culture, and what does design have to do with that? I'm particularly interested in tourism related businesses and businesses that are sort of around like inbound tourism in different parts of the world. So we did kind of, I think that we visited a lot of areas where we gave students experiences that we tried as much as we could to sort of make them not feel touristy by giving assignments around them and having people think about, well, how does this business work in terms of attracting customers and maintaining a place in a marketplace. So that was sort of the idea behind the course. And it was, well, I mean, at least if you look at the course evaluations, it was wildly successful. So I pat myself on the back for that one. But I'm sure Craig can tell you that he's probably heard any number of positive things about these things from students who have done them. And this one in particular is close to my heart. It was a lot of fun to put together and a lot of fun to execute. So we'll sort of walk through it from beginning to end. This was a spring semester class, so in that May-June term, and we started off. We had actually a few sessions, couple of sessions before we left the country, right? So the first 2 weeks we had evening orientation sessions with students. This was a pre-Zoom era. Though we actually had students call in via the program, that the Blue Jeans program that we were using prior to Zoom, because we had students who were in like the Net Plus MBA program who lived in Manistee and different places that were sort of too far away to get to campus on a Wednesday night. And so it was good that we were able to give people that option of joining the sessions remotely and taking part in the orientation that way. We would be way better at that now than we were 3 years ago. So that first session we had like a safety orientation and like an introduction to Japan. We talked a lot with students about how to pack. We tend to, on these courses, at least the ones that I have led, we move a lot. Japan, as you probably know, has a top-notch public transportation system, and so it makes a lot of sense to use that train system to visit different cities and different parts of the country, and that means changing hotels every 2 nights. And if you're going to change hotels every 2 nights, you want to have you want to pack light, you want to pack mobile, and I will say that no matter how many times we tell students about that and show them, here's what I'm taking, everybody brings too much stuff, and it ends up being more getting in and out of train stations is always more exciting than I hope it would be, but that's the way it goes. But even if you compare that like to the 2019 China course that I was a co-leader on with Professor Xu, who you may have had for marketing, in that class we moved into a dormitory at a university in Beijing and stayed there for the whole 2 weeks, right? So that was an entirely different kind of packing experience for students than the course that I led. So how that works really depends on who's teaching the class and what kind of class it is. We gave our students a homework assignment to develop a 1-minute presentation on some topic on Japan, which they then presented the next week as we got closer to our departure. Then in that 3rd week of the spring semester, so we timed this so that we left after the Net Plus residency had finished. We left for Japan on Thursday, arrived on Friday. we really, in this class, threw students off the deep end on day one, right? So we arrived in Nagoya in central Japan, and on arrival, students met homestay families and went off for a 2-night homestay experience, which we decided to do because the 2016 trip had a homestay experience, and students were really positively inclined about that, and so we kept it in the program, and it just had to be that first weekend because of the timing. But students went off to all kinds of different families, right? I mean, there were families with teenage kids, there were families with college age children, families with elementary school age children, families with no children. There were a couple of guys who stayed with one family that lived up in the mountains, probably 2 hours drive from kind of the central area where we started out, and they had a super different experience. There were several students, as you can see, had host families that lived close by with each other and were friends, and so there ended up being these kind of big multi-family sushi parties and things like that went on for a couple of days. So it was an interesting, I think, experience for students, and I thought a great way to say, okay, you're really in Japan now, right? It could be a little easy to think about, if you're staying in a hotel's a hotel, right? Like, but going off to live with a family, that's the full cultural kind of immersion. And I thought a really nice way to start the program off. So everybody spent full days with their homestay families, and then on the third day we got together. We had a farewell party with the homestay families, and then did a tea ceremony, which is a fairly interesting experience. And immediately after the tea ceremony, met with a former student of mine who works at the Noritake ceramics company. I don't know how many of you guys know Noritake, but like they make plates in China and that sort of thing. And she's a professional artist, but right, that doesn't pay the bills. So she works for this ceramics company as like a production manager. And so we sort of talked with her about that aspect of balancing work-life balance and that when you're trying to sort of concentrate on art, but you need to be a business person at the same time. And I don't know if you can see, but there's a guy in a white shirt, not the one on the right. He's in the MBA program, Jeff John, and he's a clay model sculptor for GM, right? And so as a student, right, he was sort of the embodiment in a way of the same thing that the woman we were talking to does, right? This how do you find a way of working that allows you to balance your sort of creative side and your business side. So it was kind of interesting to hear the conversations that they had, and some of the other students who are in the program had with her. Followed that up with a group dinner, which was sort of the first time it was the third day of the course before the students had really had any time to socialize together on a grand scale. But that was nice. Day 4 we had a couple of tours of local businesses there in Gifu in central Japan. One of these are businesses that friends of mine own. One is a Japanese sweets company, which is a great connection back to the tea ceremony because those sweets are generally used for tea ceremonies. And so students got to try their hand at making those, but at the same time have a good conversation with the owner of the company about what's it like to run a 6th generation family business, and it particularly when that's in a marketplace where you could imagine, right, that it largely appeals to older folks, right? And there are fewer and fewer older folks in Japan. So if the market is shrinking, how do you do things to innovate in this, how do you innovate in a 175-year-old company, to come up with new products and find new markets, particularly when you're doing something that's so traditional, right? So that's a really interesting aspect of these older Japanese businesses. They're trying to be innovative, but they're fighting against the inertia of being in a traditional market. So we had a really good conversation with him, and his wife about that whole experience, and how are they thinking that their business is going to run for the next several years. After that, we visited a little company. It's a small boutique that sells Japanese whiskey, but they run a really robust export business as part of that, right? And I don't know how many of you guys follow the Japanese whiskey market, but it is booming, to the extent that product is fairly difficult to find these days. Although if you go to Meyer, you will find Toki whiskey and probably the Nika coffee blend whiskey there, and along with Suntory Roku Gin, which is a new thing. The gin market is exploding because the whiskey makers can't keep up with demand for the whiskey, and so they've started producing something that doesn't have to sit around for 12 years before they can sell it. And that's, I mean, again, innovativeness and that is there. I would hope that I'm hoping the next trip in 2022 that I can resurrect some contacts that I have with Suntory, and we can get in to talk with a big company about how that market has just exploded over the last 10 or 15 years. So that should be fairly interesting. In the evening, then we went down to the river and took a boat ride with our dinners to watch this traditional method of fishing, where the fishermen use cormorant birds to catch fish, rather than using nets. So like it's a very hundreds and hundreds of years old kind of method of fishing. You can see we had one of the fishermen came and explained to us how they do it and what it's all about. This particular fisherman, the fish they catch go directly to the imperial family in Tokyo. So it's a fairly big deal. And again, one of these kind of local tourism businesses that is kind of kept thriving really in an interesting way in Japan. So from there, day 5 of the trip, we woke up really early and took a fairly long train ride up into the mountains to this village called Hida Osaka, where we met with a couple of local artisans, a ceramicist and a stained glass artist. The stained glass artist we met with does bespoke, made to order stained glass for people. The interesting thing is that he takes sort of, you've probably all seen like the famous wave wood block print that Hokusai did. I mean, if you saw a picture of it, you'd know, like, he'll do stained glass of those famous Japanese designs, which is fairly interesting, right? Like, we don't normally think of stained glass as being this very Western motif kind of thing in churches. He just uses, the same process to recreate kind of very Eastern designs. So he makes origami cranes out of stained glass, for example, which are really cool looking. And he sells them, all over Japan. He was on TV like once 10 years ago, and that resulted in him getting enough orders to like that he's still making stuff for people who ordered things 10 years ago. So, pretty fortunate in that sense for him. We also met with the owners of a hot spring resort and talked about what it's like running that sort of a business, which is an interesting one. Had barbecue lunch with some local folks, stayed overnight at the hot spring resort, and then we can click through here. But is that visible? Craig, is the video link popping up on screen for people?
Nope.
Nope. I think I have to change my screen share choice here. Hold on. Yeah. Right. So we were on TV. There you can see some of the stained glass things that the guy makes, and the ceramicist made each one of us a cup, which is sort of exciting. I will say this is one of the things I guess I have luck with. Is that the right way of putting it? Is that this is not the first time that my study abroad groups have been on television. In Japan, we were featured on a variety show in 2013 when we went there. We had a film crew travel with us for 2 days, and then they put us on a comedy program of all things. So there's, I suppose, we're two out of three, right? So there's a reasonably good chance that if you come to Japan with me in 2022, you'll be on television. If that appeals to you, good news. So day 6, so we woke up the next day, traveled over to the Sea of Japan side of the country, walking around kind of a mountain city for a while, looking at different kinds of businesses there, and then got to Ishikawa Prefecture. We visited the 21st Century Museum of Art and talked to some of their folks who run the museum, toured the Omicho fish market, and that's fairly, I like that day. I asked students to go and spend my money to find something that they think I've never eaten, and whoever brings back the strangest thing wins a prize. So it's always interesting to see what people find in a Japanese fish market that they think I have not eaten. Only 1 or 2 groups are actually able to bring back things I haven't eaten, but all of them bring back interesting stuff in any event. We went from there. Now we go sort of to the big city, and we spent the last several days of the trip in Tokyo. The Edo Tokyo Museum is a really interesting museum to look at the history of the city, but it's tied really tightly, as you can imagine, to things like the car industry and the electronics industry and those different businesses and how different industries and how they develop in Tokyo over time is really interesting to see. And we went to 1 day of a sumo tournament, as you can see there, which I think the students get a great kick out of. We've done that in 2013 and 2018. We were able to go to sumo tournaments given the timing of the trips. So I think that's kind of a highlight of it for people, because it's just like one of those things that's like really Japanese. On the 9th day, we had an all-day visit with the Tokyo Philharmonic Orchestra. This was, I think, a really interesting experience for the students to talk with both their marketing staff and the musical director around questions of, like, you know, how do you build a fan base for an orchestra in the 21st century? Like, how do you convert teenagers who are into pop music into fans of classical music, who will spend money on tickets and who will buy CDs and things like that? And how else do you make money, right? If you probably can't make enough money just on concert ticket sales to stay in business. So what other kinds of things is a professional orchestra doing? And this particular orchestra, we heard they have something like 450 performances or engagements a year, right? So that's clearly more than 1 per day. And so they've got parts of the orchestra off doing commercial recordings for TV commercials. They've got, groups doing this and groups doing that to sort of diversify revenue streams. It's just a really interesting conversation, again, around something that maybe students in an MBA program aren't thinking about in terms of that being a business. on a regular kind of way. One of the things you can see, that picture down at the bottom, one of the assignments for this class was that students had to keep a sketch journal. And so they were drawing the whole time from beginning to end, and with different themes every day. And actually at the orchestra concert, we were told you can't take pictures. And so it's sort of an interesting opportunity for students to draw different things. Some, like some of the students were already really good artists, but there's one picture of where a student was just using color and swirly lines to like draw their impression of the music and how it felt to them. Some really kind of interesting free flowing ideas there. So the last day, then we went and we saw the Lion King musical, which I don't know, probably you have seen, whether in the animated form or in the musical form. And again, that was kind of just an interesting way of thinking about something that we think of as being this really American institution, and how does something like that get translated across cultures into a consumable for people in other cultures. And what I thought was really, I had never seen The Lion King, but almost, I would say everybody else had seen it. And of course, what was neat is that like the whole thing was in Japanese, but everybody already knows the story. And so, it's about that visual and the experience of this in another language. I was fascinated listening to it with like how they did things like the different characters who have apparently different accents in English. Well, they all had different accents in Japanese also, right? And so there were Southern like the Japanese version of a Southern dialect, or like a rough and tumble, Bronx dialect, or whatever were being used by these different characters. And then Simba and the sort of the royal lions were using super polite Japanese. And so it's just really interesting to see from that perspective, I thought. Then back to Detroit. And once we got back into the US, we had one more evening session to bring the group back together. They gave sort of reflective presentations about the class and their sort of key takeaways from it. And we were able to have sort of one final group dinner together. And then at the end, final papers are due. So that's sort of this tour of a class. Maybe I'll see if anybody has any questions now before I move on.
Well, if nobody's got any questions, maybe you could kind of cover the reflective presentations a little bit, because I think that would be very interesting to hear what students actually thought of the trip once they got back.
What would I say? That's a hard time remembering the details on this, but I think students are struck by different things, I guess. Some are struck, and some of the things that they talk about are, the differences between what they expected and what they experienced. And I would say, it sounds funny, but like a lot of students go through this sort of about the third day experience feeling like I like Japanese food, but not for every meal. And so there's a lot of kind of reflection on, I guess, feeling and experiencing culture shock more than you thought you were going to. And a lot of students talking about how they overcame that and how they adjusted to it. And how in some ways the kind of, at that moment when they decided to not reject the fish that was put before them for breakfast, how that opened their eyes to a lot of different things that they weren't noticing in the country. Does that make sense? So there were discussions along those lines. There were discussions along the lines of, people tend to reflect on like, why don't we have a great public transportation system like that? It's a, you know, obviously somebody's making money on this. It's a business. And it runs very well, and it's so convenient. Like, wouldn't it, that would be transformative if we had that kind of an industry going on in our country. So I think there's things like that. Um, a lot of discussion of like how some businesses are really different, right? Like, so we may have a 7-Eleven or a Circle K convenience store. They have 7-Eleven and Circle K convenience stores, but they're entirely different in terms of what you can buy and what you can do in a convenience store. And so the same business is translated across cultures differently. And so some people talked about those kinds of experiences as well. So yeah, that I think from a technical perspective is there. I think from the, you know, I think for lots of students, it's a life altering kind of an experience. We have, on this particular trip, we had at least one student who had not ever been on an airplane prior to flying from Detroit to Tokyo. And the opening of the world that one experiences going through that is a pretty, I suppose, heavy, profound thing. So there's generally a lot of discussion of that, I would say. Okay, so if I go on, I just came up with what I think are a list of benefits of doing a study abroad like this, right? I think you can't overestimate the value of a firsthand experience of a different culture. There just isn't, you know, there's no substitute for being there and experiencing the sights and sounds and smells of it. You know, I operate fairly easily in Japan, having lived there for 10 years. But I love going places like Hong Kong, where I feel really off balance and don't really know what's going on, because that experience of someplace different is just enriching across the board, and there's no substitute for that. I think, again, as I mentioned earlier, this opportunity to think about your business curriculum in a different context is really important. You know, you learn about marketing, and then to go and see how the principles of marketing are applied in a foreign context allows you to think about those things differently. You know, here's an interesting example. So on the China trip, we visited an electric vehicle company, and you know, they talked about having service stations for their cars set up between Beijing and Shanghai. And the student asked, like, well, you know, how long do customers, when they pull in, how long do they have to wait for their battery to charge, and what do they do in the, you know, they're thinking 40 minutes or something like that. What do you do for 40 minutes while you're waiting for your battery to charge? And the company guy is like, well, no, I mean, they pull in and we have fully charged batteries at the service station. So they drive in and a robot changes the battery in 3 minutes, and they get back on the road and drive on. And we all kind of looked at each other and we're like, I mean, they've solved the problem, right? That the problem is that the issue is not speed of charging. You know, you get around that by having battery swap. Now, you know, at some point, currently batteries are probably so big that's maybe impractical for everybody to have an electric vehicle, but that's going to change over time. And I mean, everything gets smaller, right? So I think seeing those kind of innovative ideas that are going on in another culture can spark ideas for people. To me, there's an absolute enhancement of your resume that going on a study abroad brings. You know, if you have it on your resume, you're signaling to your current or a future employer openness to new experience, right? Agreeableness, other characteristics that employers like. And You probably also it's probably also a way of raising your hand to say, offer me an expat position, right? I've got one student now who's entertaining a job offer overseas from his company. Whether it's because he went on study abroad or not, I cannot say, but it certainly probably doesn't hurt from that perspective. I think you will discover new interests. You might even change career paths. I know, as I say here, of 4 students from previous courses who have moved or plan to move to Asia following doing one of these study abroad courses. 4 out of 50, right, is not the biggest number in the world, but 10% is also not insignificant. And so to have gone someplace and experienced it and enjoyed it and thought, I really like the person who I am in this context, I want to do more of this. That's not an unknown phenomenon. I would say making lifelong friends then is a third example, and we've actually had a marriage out of one of our study abroad courses. So, from what I can tell on Facebook, they're doing just fine. So that's sort of an interesting thing, but certainly the friendships that people have and the connections that you have with classmates. If you ask anybody who's been on these programs, the relationships that they have with the people from the study abroad courses are just qualitatively different from the relationships that they have with their other classmates. They have been through something intense and unique together that's powerful. So that's a good thing too. And so far, like on all of these trips that I've led, it's always happened around karaoke, right? That like the third night of the trip, the students decide to go sing together, and it's like that's transformative for the group in terms of its interpersonal relationships, which is interesting, I think. All right, so how much does all of this cost, right? If you decide to do it, a faculty-led study abroad, it is a class, right? So there's a 3 credit hour course, IMB 580, and you pay regular tuition for that. There is then a program fee, which is usually in the $3,500 to $4,000 range. That's the sticker price. That includes airfare, in-country transportation, meals, site visits. Essentially, you pay only for personal purchases, right? So whatever souvenirs you want to buy, if you enjoy a tasty beverage in the evening, right, that's on you. But virtually everything else is covered as part of the program fee. The $4,000 though, so it is reduced by a couple of scholarships. First, the Cartha Family School of Management Study Abroad Scholarship. I don't know how many of you have had Professor Keith Cartha, but he pretty generously endowed a scholarship fund for study abroad at SOM. And so students on our courses get $1,000 off of the program fee from that. And then the International Global Studies program has a $1,500 scholarship, which is open even if you're not an SOM student. So there are a lot of programs led by other faculty in other schools, and every student who goes on one of those is getting $1,500 off for 2022. So that effectively brings you down to $1,500, which that's real money. But for the Japan course, right, that's like less than the airfare. And so to get the whole thing paid covered for less than the cost of the plane ticket makes it a pretty extraordinary deal from that perspective. As I say, I'm aiming for $4,000 for the 2022 program, unless we find that airfare is radically impacted by COVID. At the moment, when I have done searches on airfare for this coming summer, even though we're not allowed to go to Japan, the prices are still in that $1,300 to $1,500 range, which is great. That would make the program easily doable in that $4,000 price point. So what do I think does well in terms of these programs? I think these programs are bespoke, right? Like they are unique. They're developed directly by our faculty members, fairly I don't know of anybody who uses canned content from like an EF or a study abroad provider. The programs are based on personal connections, and there's the value attached to that, right, is hard to quantify. Our ability to spend a day, with the Tokyo Philharmonic is because, I have a colleague who works for the Tokyo Philharmonic Orchestra, and you don't get that kind of content with like a commercial study abroad program. And again, we have these led by faculty with local knowledge. So, I have pretty extensive Japan experience. Professor Shu is Chinese, and so the programs that we're able to run, I think, really benefit from that. The mixture of business and cultural content is fantastic. My philosophy is that I like to have an intense program, but one that offers you free time, because there's some intensity in that, right? There's intensity in saying, tonight's dinner is a per diem dinner. Here's 2,000 yen, right? Go have dinner. And you get to go and point at stuff on the menu and see what happens, rather than me translating and that. And I mean, part of the adventure of being in a foreign country, right, is ordering something and you're not exactly sure what's going to show up. And hopefully it turns into a positive experience. But I feel like, we generally in the programs that I run, we're done at 4 o'clock or 4:30 in the afternoon, right? Which gives you free time in the evening to go explore. We live in a technological era, right? When you've got a map on your phone, and if you've dropped a pin on your hotel, you can get around a city of 20 million people without too much of a problem. So that, I think, is part of the experience that we put on the table that's really good. We are obviously strong in Asia, right? I think, Craig, can you remember the last study abroad program that was not to an Asian country? It was probably Mark Perry doing Russia, like 2008 or 9.
It was, yeah. I think it was just before both of us got to the university. But yeah, that was an interesting trip. But yeah, most of it has been in Asia, but there's a but there.
But there's a but there, right? So we have some faculty who have really strong interests in Latin America and Europe as well. And so we will see if those faculty decide that leading a study abroad is something that they're interested in doing. I would like to see us get to a point where we offer more than one course per year, so that we can keep the Asia courses going, because, as students probably know, Asian business is very relationship driven, and it's a good idea to keep the relationships that we have with our study abroad partners in Asia going. But it'd be really cool if we could offer an Asia course and a Latin America course, for example, in the same year, and give students some options in terms of location from that perspective. So we'll see what happens. Study abroad is done sort of on a, where the faculty are concerned, it's like raise your hand and say you want to do it. And so it's when somebody does, we'll have another kind of a course. How does it fit into your program? So here are some details, right? If you're an MBA student and you're a general business concentration, it's easy. You just take plan to take INB 580 as one of your 3 electives. That's all you got to do, is decide you want to do it. Same thing if you're in the international business concentration. INB 580 is one of the international business elective courses, and so you just decide that's going to be one of your 3 IB elective courses. You're off to the races. For other concentrations, it's a little bit trickier. And here you can see, so the easiest thing to do is to petition to replace INB 585, which is the global business course, with INB 580. One of the things to note is that you can take INB 585 at the same time as your capstone. So if you are thinking at all about doing study abroad, don't take INB 585, because you could do it in the last semester along with the 589 capstone if you end up deciding you don't want to do study abroad. But if you are thinking about it, because that's the easiest one to swap, it makes sense to just keep it in your back pocket. If you have already taken 585 and you've decided I really want to do study abroad, you can petition to replace a concentration elective with 580. In order to do so, you have to talk to the faculty member who's teaching the course you want to replace and get their support. They may ask you to do some extra work, like write them a paper that relates to the particular class that you're swapping out. And certain courses are not very likely to be swappable or substitutable. So you'll want to talk to advisors, or you'll want to talk to faculty to get a sense of which courses are sort of more likely to be supported in terms of being swapped out. Good news, if you're in the organizational leadership concentration, even though I love my management 546 international or advanced negotiation class, I will support all petitions to replace that with a study abroad. So, because I'm enthusiastic about study abroad. And I think that if you want to do it, INB 54 or MGT 546 is a fair course in the org leadership concentration or in the MSLOD program to swap out for a study abroad. Who else? MSA is easy. Again, just choose INB 580 as one of your 3 non-accounting courses, and you're off to the races. We had a couple of MSA students on that 2018 course. And then MSLOD, same thing. Easiest thing, swap out 546. The courses that are possible to be swapped out, but you'll want to check with faculty, are listed there. And in this case, I can tell you, this is a little easier for me because there are no electives in the MSLOD like there are in the MBA program. I can say that those classes listed right there are almost certainly not possible to swap out. And you'll note that one of them, Management 501, is my intro negotiation class. I don't think you should swap that for study abroad, mostly because if you did, you couldn't take 546 because 546 is the prerequisite, right? So that wouldn't make any sense. So that's where that all stands. And the last thing I would say is that if like me, right? So in my case, I did my last semester overseas, which got me a visa, and that made it really easy to find a job in Japan. Or, well, really is maybe a strong word. It made it relatively more easy to find a job in Japan than had I been looking from the US. You don't have to, maybe that's not your goal, but maybe you do want to spend a semester overseas instead of 2 weeks in the summer. We have actually a fairly robust set of partnerships in Europe and one in South America. There are some discussions with schools in Taiwan. I know there's a school in Mexico we have a relationship, but I don't know if there's an exchange relationship set up at the graduate level yet. These are the ones that were on the UM-Flint website as having graduate program options available. So if something longer term is of interest, there's almost certainly an opportunity to do that. I would say I've visited the Romanian American University in Bucharest. It's pretty cool. Bucharest as a city would be a pretty cool place to spend a semester studying. I would imagine Barcelona would be, or Zagreb. Either of those seem to me like they'd be out of hand if you had a semester to be able to do that. I would say planning is way more imperative here even than for the short-term study abroad, where you have to swap a class, because you're likely looking at taking a full-time, like a 9 or a 12 credit hour load, and making sure that the courses that are available overseas are things that you haven't yet taken as part of your MBA program, so that you can time that out and get the most out of it. Makes a lot of sense. And I would say at SOM, Dr. Candigan is probably the best person to talk to about these things, but Sarah Pattison over in the Center for Global Engagement also likely has a good deal of information about those things. But Yenner is probably the easiest person within SOM there. Biggest benefits, right? More real potential for language skill development. Students sometimes after the short 2-week programs, they're like, well, I'm disappointed I didn't learn any Japanese. And I say, don't be, you were, you were probably not going to learn any real Japanese in 2 weeks, but in a semester, you might, right? You've got a better shot at it with a longer program like that. And just the depth of the cross-cultural experience is so much better with a longer term program. My one piece of advice, get on a plane, right? And go. I think there's too much value in the experience. And if it's at all workable in your life, find a way to make it happen, because I don't think anybody that's ever done it regrets it. And I would say even looking back at like one of the students who I think probably had, at least what I thought at the time was one of the least positive experiences, ended up being one of the 4 people who moved to Japan or moved to Asia after doing the study abroad. So, on the surface, but what was going on in her mind and that when she came back and the experience itself, I think ended up being a positive one, and she ended up living there for 2 or 3 years, I believe, as part of the JET program teaching English. So, all right, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them now, or my email address is right there, and you can feel free to send me an email anytime, and I will probably send you much more than you're expecting back in terms of information about different study abroad programs.
I have a quick question.
Oh, sorry. I have another commitment at 8. I was just starting to type something out, but thank you so much for this presentation. It really helped me.
Great.
So I really, really appreciate it, but I've got to get going.
Not a problem.
Thank you.
Yep.
Do you have students of all at all stages in their life attend the abroad studies?
Yes, I think that's a fair statement. The age, so the age range on the 2018 program, the youngest student turned 20 on the airplane on the way to Japan. And then the oldest was probably over 45.
Good number.
It was a student who I was not going to ask how old she was. But I'm pretty sure that she and I were in roughly the same age bracket.
Great.
I don't know that I've had anybody over 50, but maybe on that 2013 Taiwan program, Craig, I don't know if you remember Teresa Fick. She might have been 50. So yes, I would say that's a fair statement. So I mean, everything from undergrad, the SOM trips are usually graduate student heavy. I'd say in the past they've been, 10, like 2/3 graduate students, 1/3 undergrad.
And the other thing that I think you just briefly covered on, I mean, you do a lot of traveling, a lot of walking on your trips.
Yeah.
So, certainly being able to handle the load of all the miles that you have to put on over a trip is certainly key when looking at certain study abroad trips, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, it's, there are days on mine when you're going to walk 7 miles in a day, which, for some people that's a lot. And Japan tends to not be flat. And even if it is flat, you're walking up and down stairs in and out of train stations. So it's an intensive kind of physical full body experience, right? And of course, because the in-country part of the course is 13 days or something like that. So we really try to pack as much as we can into that. Like, it doesn't make sense to have, 2 days where there's nothing programmed and it's just free time, right? Like we want you to experience as much as possible.